Welcome to Unlearning Out Loud, the show where we try to figure out why we do the things we do and whether maybe we could stop doing at least the worst of them. I'm Mike.
And I'm Melissa. And before we go any further, I would just like to announce that Baby 2025 Watch is officially underway, and we are in the pumpkin baby window. I am currently on emotional standby, just like a hospital go bag, Mike.
And I don't know pretty much what any of that means, and that's why I'm not a parent. When you say Baby Watch 2025, is anything like that Fat Bear watch that my wife is so obsessed with on Facebook? Have you seen this?
I haven't. I'm missing out.
It's a whole thing. This. People all over the world. These bears are going to try to survive the winter, and so they have to fatten up, and they literally have brackets. And so that show, and they have live cameras and feeds that track these bears in Alaska. And you pick which one you think is going to get the fattest in time for winter. And all I can tell you around my house is we were Team Chunk around here. That's what my wife said. We're Team Chunk. So I don't know if Chunk won, but anyway, well, welcome.
I got nothing, Mike. I got nothing.
Well, when you say I got nothing on go bags for hospitals, but that does mean that you mentioned pumpkins. Halloween's coming, which means it's horror movie month for Mike. And as my wife could tell you, if you don't like a horror movie, get out of the living room, because I do love a little horror movie action during October. If I could, I'd do one every day. It gets me ready for October 31st. It's that part of the year where I soothe myself by watching creepy little Victorian dolls that talk and, possess children. And we'll talk all about this later, but apparently I've been told that my enjoyment of this is not normal, whatever that means.
Well, that is a true contrast in coping styles, because while you soothe with possession movies, which I have to tell you, I can't watch. I am not a horror movie fan at all. I can't do it. My own self-soothing is more like color-coded crisis plans and lists. And we'll absolutely talk about that later, because I have just survived NFAIR, which is a national conference, and also my personal Hunger Games. The conference is over, and I truly would like my life back. I would like sleep back. I would like my inbox to stop screaming. I think I am going to be invoicing the universe for emotional damage, but it's all good here too.
You'll never get that invoice paid. Trust me. You want to let the audience know what's an NFAIR?
Sure.
Is that a monster that turns up in a horror movie? The Haunting of NFAIR?
Sometimes it felt like I was beating a monster. Absolutely. No, it was the National Forum to Advance Rural Education, which is the National Rural Education Association's annual conference. And this last year it was in Salt Lake City. As their executive director, it was my first NFAIR conference, and it went swimmingly well.
Well, nothing like swimmingly in Salt Lake City, Utah.
I see what you did there.
We'll get to more of your baby watch stuff, I'm sure, as we go forward. But I heard crisis planning, and now I heard go bags. I feel like your world is surrounded by crises, but more on that later. But you talk about all this stuff. This is why I don't have kids. But let's get to today's episode, which I think is a great title. And I do have to share something with you.
Yeah.
I was thinking. Now, first of all, I know that you're thinking this glow coming off the camera. For those of you who aren't watching, that you won't know what I'm talking about. So let me explain. I have this heavenly glow around my
very holy.
Back. Yeah, very holy. And that is from the windows behind me. And I don't know. I'm going to leave it because I think it gives me a bit of an aura. But I also want people to tune in and actually watch us. And so I thought, people who know me know I love live music. I love concerts. I go to tons of them. And so I thought, I'm going to wear a concert shirt for each one of our recordings. So
all 10 of them, you have 10 concert shirts.
Guess which one I'm wearing. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
The big reveal?
Yeah.
So I know those of you at home, you can't see, but it is Devo. And yes, I know, way to alienate the kids in the very first episode. But then again, the kids are always going back to stuff that I used to like the first time around or the second time around.
No, it's
and so
cool
maybe
again.
Devo's a thing today and tomorrow. Well, I think they're kind of in the 90s vibe right now. So maybe I need to break out my Faith No More shirt, or maybe it's No Doubt and we're doing early 2000s. I don't know. But we'll get there. And don't get me started. By the way, I heard you do the whip it thing there. And don't get me started because I got an entire soapbox on songs that bands are famous for that they shouldn't be. So just to set the
maybe
record
we need
straight.
to do an episode on that.
We could, and I might need to be like a 2 or 3 parter because I got a whole laundry list of them. And let me tell you something, Whip It is probably song number 288 on the quality list for Devo of songs they should be known for. So just more on that later. So today's episode, let's just get to the good stuff, is called, Is Everyone Else an A bleep hole? Everybody knows what we're talking about now. And we'll have to talk about, explicit
Censored?
language on this podcast because I'm usually a walking Quentin Tarantino movie, so I've always been able to temper myself as an ex-educator and keep those things out. But I think gradually we're going to have to start infusing legitimate curse words. But let's taper it. Let's bring it in slowly.
Okay.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
Okay, over time.
Yeah.
And so by the end, I'm going to sound like Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction. I can guarantee you. By the time we get through that episode. And so I might even have some Jerry curl going on. You just never know. So anyway, we are starting with this big question about, is everyone else a jerk? And because I think right now you walk around and ask people that the answer tends to be, they think the answer is yes. Right.
Yeah.
So I know, Melissa, we talked about starting gentle.
Yeah. If everybody else is a-hole or is it just me is pretty gentle. I mean, truly. Yeah.
Well, so I think we just dive in. Although if this is the gentle topic, just you wait. So this one's really about, it couldn't possibly be true, right? I mean, I think we all know that it's something that we might say that we have a lot of these things that we say to ourselves that deep inside, we know there's probably not, that there's something else going on. But we don't really have the opportunity to stop and think and process whether or not that is what's really going on. But before we get into the topic, let's just set the stage a little bit.
Sure.
And because I bet everybody out there, the millions of listeners across the world who are tuning into this episode, are wondering, like, why another podcast? And what's the purpose of this one? First of all, why another podcast? Well, why not? Right? They're not hard to do. And you and I love to talk, especially me. So let's just record it for posterity.
Absolutely.
And so, there's just, there's some things that we love to talk about. And sometimes we thought, let's just have this conversation where we could get other people involved. And so over the course of this podcast, we're going to have guests. We're going to really dive into some really fun stuff. But as two educators, and we didn't want to spend a bunch of time on biography at the beginning of the episode, because to be honest with you, that's when people turn it off. Or look for the next chapter. You'll get to know us throughout, for better or for worse. But sneak preview, we were both educators, both are educators. We spent our whole life dedicated to learning and how to help others learn. And if you add in the years we spent in the classroom, well, if I do the math, to subtract my ditching hours from attending hours.
Nice. Good call.
So I might do a whole podcast episode on how to intercept the phone call when Camelback High School calls to tell your parent that you missed 6th hour science for the 8th time. And if it happens 2 more times, you're getting dropped.
And I might be able to do the auto pen conversation around how to get your parent's signature on the slip that you sent to the office to get it excused.
I can one-up you on that one. You ready for this one?
Yeah.
I would call it the podcast would probably be called How to Leverage Pocket Butt Sweat to Your Advantage. And that's not a cuss word. It's okay. Say butt. So again, I'm dating myself here, but when I was a kid, report cards were, what was it called? Where it was a sealed with the 2 little tear things you tear off the end and you open it up and there would be the report card, right? It was mailed to your parent and it had been printed by slamming through the carbon paper, right? Like a printer slamming through carbon paper to put my D in economics on the report card. And so if you were skilled, which I was, something like right out of an Ocean 11's movie, what you could do is you could open up the report card, go, oh crap, I got a D. Then you gently lay the top back down over it. You get a writing implement of some sort that doesn't leave any marks. So like especially a pen with no ink in it.
So much
And you make
thought.
sure you got it lined up just right. I mean, this is like a heist from the Louvre, really. And so, ripped from the headlines.
Yeah, I think I got
So
to.
then a D, all it needs is a little bit of a line in the middle of the letter D to
Wow.
turn it into a B.
If you would
And a
have
little
put
bit
that
of
much
round in
thought
the
into
corner.
getting the work done, you might have just gotten the B.
Yeah, but this was really more fun. And so you're probably asking yourself, why butt sweat? Well, because that was the final touch. If you put it all back together and you put it in your pocket and you kept it in your back pocket for the entire day or 2 days, and then you got home and just nonchalantly said, "Oh, Mom, here's my report card," and then you undid it. Well, you know that there are magical properties. It's almost alchemy involved in butt sweat mixing with carbon, mixing with D's that have been turned. Anyway, very convincing work. So anyway, that is a whole podcast episode to that we'll have to do down the road. But we want to talk about, as educators, what are some things that we need to unlearn? Because I'm increasingly becoming convinced that there's a lot of stuff that we operate on, the information that we operate on, or belief systems that we operate on, that we have learned either through formal education or through our environment, through our family, through our geographical, wherever it comes from the movies that we think are true, and we just kind of trust without asking some tough questions. So, ironically, this term unlearning will still come with some learning, but the learning will be concentrated. It won't be like your bloated economics class in high school. It'll be concentrated like a Tide pod for your laundry, right? Concentrated detergent.
Did you know
right?
that those things are mostly water? Those non-concentrated brand things they're mostly water. Looks like more, but it's just water with color.
And you know what? Sometimes that's kind of like our education curriculums. Mostly water. And so, we have a lot to say on a lot of stuff if you can't tell. So let's kick this one off. So you and I had had done a podcast a long time ago where we talked about thinking fast and slow, and this idea that the brain operates in these two modes. Lots of work done by a lot of very smart people, especially in the field of economics. We did a book review on the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and really the Tide Pod version of it was that we are emotional creatures, right? That try to rationalize our emotional reactions through logic. Right. Mm-hmm. But it's reverse of what we believe. What we think of ourselves is we think we're logical creatures who have emotions. But really what the emerging research is really making very, very clear is that it's emotion first, logic second. Logic is employed to rationalize our responses. Mm-hmm. Right. And what's really going to be interesting is to any listeners that we have out there. Hi, Mom. She might be the only one listening on my behalf to start. Is that much of what we share with you is going to trigger that very emotional response. And you're going to there's going to be stuff that might be uncomfortable to hear. And that's not to say whether it's right or not, right? That is, we can go down the path of verifying and looking for more evidence, et cetera, et cetera. But the first reaction, the first step to really unlearning some things is really reflective. It's noticing in yourself, how did I just respond to that, right? And was it predictable? Was it something that I could have already anticipated? The minute a person says this or says that, I'm going to respond positively or negatively, right? And these aren't theories. These are actionable understandings about how people operate. The entire advertising industry is built on these concepts, right? There's people making millions of dollars every year off of leveraging these things. And in my humble opinion, if we'd spent less time in some of the classes we took in high school learning some of the stuff that we've never used since, and spending more time learning about these pieces, it might have served us really, really well. So anyway, so we have a lot of kind of distorted logic, and we're going to have some fun with that throughout the course of the podcast.
Yeah, and when you take that and you pair that with some of the things that I've heard, and I know you've read about too, about the brain being an energy conservation machine, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's so true. And so energy conservation I'm glad you really mentioned that, because this idea, if you think about how where we've come from as a species, right, and how we've evolved to become who we are, how we've been so successful is that we don't waste energy. And I mean, we don't waste energy. I mean that literally, right? Because we were basically a calorie economy, right? As humans, we seek calories and we sought to not spend them any more than we had to.
Mm-hmm.
Reckless calorie spending leads to extinction. And little that people don't realize, and they don't really think about it, but thinking uses energy. It
Mm-hmm.
literally burns energy. And so the brain has developed over time to make decisions about things as what I would consider to be just good enough model. Is it good enough to get me through this moment and to the next moment, right? Someone could argue to the next meal.
Sounds
right?
like my son in middle school. He was the get right guy.
Right. Is it good enough for now?
Good enough?
Right?
Yes.
Is it good enough for now? And so if it can make a snap judgment, and there's a lot of ways it can do that and move on, that's good for the survival of a species, right? For the advancement of the species. However, when you start getting into the sophistication of modern society, especially when you inject modern media, social media, all the stuff that we're being bombarded with at a really much rapidly, increasing rate, our brains aren't really prepared for that. And so you've got this energy conservation machine trying to make a quick decision when it actually needs to slow itself down and be willing to, to go ahead and have the cinnamon bun, stop and think for a minute. All right, I'm not endorsing cinnamon buns. I know they'll kill people. But yes, the brain has evolved to conserve energy, which leads us to make decisions with the least amount of energy required. So we do survive, but, right? So how does that lead into today's topic, which is everyone, basically an a-hole?
Yep.
And so let's start simple. We're going to talk about something today called attribution bias. And this is really the core of why we think many of the people out there, especially the people that we would consider not part of our tribe, right? Whether it's our sports team fans, right? Like if I'm a Packer fan, I'm not a Packer fan.
Mm-hmm.
Just
people that go to ASU.
Right. So Packer fans versus Viking fans, political party versus political party.
Sure.
East Coast, West Coast rap, things in the 90s, right? You name it. We can come up with tons of these things. And so we make certain assumptions about people that aren't us or aren't part of our tribe in a way that is sometimes deeply flawed. So we're going to start simple. So attribution theory is basically, it talks about how we explain why things happen, right? We're always trying to explain, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? And especially, why do people act the way they do, right? Which is the heart of this, this conversation. It goes back to work that's been done as long ago as the mid 1900s. And then it's just been built on. It's been built on and built on and built on. And just a word of caution, people hear the word theory, right? So this is attribution theory, and they think theory means, like when your seventh grader came up with a theory about why the volcano, right? Like that, the word has been misused in that regard, in the idea that many of the things in social psychology, especially things that aren't, immediately testable with a singular outcome, are generally referred to as ongoing theories because they're being developed and they continue to have evidence that stacks up. And so just because it's a theory doesn't mean that it's, unlikely, just because you're, like just the way your seventh grader's theory about why the vinegar and baking soda mixture came out of the volcano is probably wrong. And so anyway, so this has been researched for quite a while. And there's this big idea that when something happens, we tend to ask, like, what caused that? And we usually pick one of two buckets to find our answer. So bucket one is internal. So that happened because of who that person is. That happened because of their personality, their ability, their effort. So if someone misses a deadline, you go, well, they're lazy. they're disorganized, right? And that's not to say those things might not be true, right? But that's our immediate assumption quite frequently if we go to that bucket right away. Bucket 2 is external, right? So that happened because of the situation, the context, the pressure, the conditions. So instead of they missed the deadline because that project was impossible, or they weren't giving clear directions, or they were covering for 3 people, right? This is different than the original one, which is that's who that person is. And what's interesting about bucket 2 is, they missed the deadline. Well, a lot of times it's I missed the deadline, but I missed it because it was undoable, et cetera, et cetera.
So internal is it's you, and external is it's what happened to you, basically.
Yeah. So basically it's right, this idea of something that's built into the person versus the person is being bounced around by some things that have happened to them or influenced by things that have happened to them. But it even gets more nuanced than that. Psychologists also talk about this idea of stability and control. It's the cause, is the cause stable or unstable? Meaning, is this something that's probably always true, or is it temporary? And is it controllable or uncontrollable? And I know that sounds a little confusing, but let's use an example. So someone's late to a meeting. You can say a couple things. So I could say, she's just irresponsible, right? Well, that's internal. She is it's a core of who she is. She's irresponsible. It's stable because it's who she is, right? And it's controllable. Well, she should fix that. What you're saying is this is who that person is, and she could fix it, right? And again, I'm not saying these things might not be to some degree true, but when we talk about it being our immediate judgment, right, and our lasting judgment, that's a little bit different. So you could also say traffic was a mess because of a crash, right? That's external, right? It's something that happened outside of the person, outside of you. So normally if I come into work, I'm saying, oh my God, traffic was a mess. And here's, I'm late because traffic was a mess. It was because of a crash. You're hearing this stacked up list of things that are external, right? They're unstable. I couldn't have predicted them. And they're uncontrollable. I can't control how other people drive. So hence I'm a little bit late.
So then the choice, and I'm just going to say, traffic was a mess because of a crash, could have been controllable because maybe it was you texting and causing the crash, right?
True.
So the choice that you make there in those 2 buckets, that's the attribution.
Yes. And notice this you point to an interesting concept is that even when things that seem obvious to an external observer, like, well, she was texting, so clearly that's a controllable internal. Yet how many times do people still manage to take something where they clearly, you shouldn't have been, well, I had the text because, and then they're fill in the blank, right? And I've done it a million times with no accident. It's not that. And it's my husband's fault because if he hadn't have been the one texting me about where do I keep the sugar in the, right? And so, but I had to respond or he'll drive me crazy all day. So, so yes. And, we're doing this all the time. Like we're doing it dozens to hundreds of times a day. And the thing is, it's on autopilot, thinking fast and slow, right? This is one of the thinking fast things that occur that we're not even aware of, right? But you can be. It's really not that hard to catch. You watch someone cut you off on the freeway. You explain it, right? You come up with a reason. I have to explain, why did that person cut me off on the freeway? You explain it. Your kid snaps at you. You explain it. Your coworker doesn't respond to your email. You explain it.
Your husband leaves his underwear on the floor. You explain it. So we act on our explanation like it's a fact, not a guess, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah. And when I say you explain it, I didn't say how we explain it, right? So if someone cut me off on the freeway, I'll explain it all right. It'll include the aforementioned Samuel L. Jackson vocabulary words, right? And it usually means that guy's a, right? And that guy's a so-and-so. But if I cut someone off in traffic, and we've all done it, I don't care how good of a driver you are, right? It was, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. The sun got in my eyes. I didn't mean to do it. And not once have I ever said that about the guy that cut me off. I'll bet the sun, I wonder if the sun got in his eyes, right?
Yeah.
And not to say anybody who cuts you off, the sun is getting in their eyes and we're all Mr. Rogers, right? it's what we're doing in the fact that we don't even consider it's a possibility, right? So point earlier about it's a guess that we just accept as a fact, right? Whatever we do to explain it, we and then we ride with it, right? So we're going to talk about, we treat our guess like it's the truth. And it's really kind of, speaking of, Halloween and horror movies, it's kind of scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want you to talk a little bit about the fundamental attribution error, and you've named it something fundamental, which makes me think that we all do it and it's going to be uncomfortable. Yes?
Oh, it's going to be uncomfortable, or we wouldn't be talking about it. And, obviously and I know when you say, you've named it a fundamental attribution error, we're talking about society. We even named the people that have done this work have yes, there are different types of attribution bias errors. And one of them is known as the fundamental attribution error. It's called FAE for short, because, when in doubt, acronym. I always think, maybe those keep calm and, you see them everywhere. Keep calm and do this, keep calm and do that. We should have one that just says, especially in education, keep calm and acronym. But it's called FAE. And it's our tendency to overcredit some internal flaw or trait in someone else and undercredit the situation we're in. So in plain language, what that means is when other people mess up, we assume it's because of who they are, right? Not what happened to them. And we usually don't give up a moment to consider that there may be more going on. This was named out loud in the 70s. And basically, the researchers who are working on this basically talked about we're biased towards thinking that behavior equals personality. We default to it's them, not it's the context. But what I'll point out is we default to that behavior equals personality for other people, right? This isn't something that we do for ourselves.
Sure.
Right? For ourselves, there's always a reason, and we usually think it's a good reason, right? But most of the time, there may be the observer across the table looking at me. I think I've got a perfectly good reason for that. In the meantime, he or she is likely making a judgment about who I am, right, based on the behavior that they're seeing. So we default to this idea of, behavior is the personality.
So if you're short with me in a meeting that we're having, I might think, wow, rude. Mike's cranky and disrespectful. Not, wow, maybe Mike hasn't eaten breakfast today and he's putting out 5 fires and has a lot going on.
Well, first of all, I'm not a firefighter. Just to be clear, I was an educator, so I've never put out an actual fire. And I'm not sure I've ever skipped breakfast because it's part of my ritual. I might miss my own funeral if it meant missing breakfast. But you're right. Yeah, you'll assume that it's my character, not my circumstance. And I know there's people in the audience that will say, yes, but aren't you eventually? Don't the behaviors eventually represent who you are? Yes. And one of the things that we're going to talk about, especially over time in this podcast, is this idea that your odds of something being reality increase the more data you get, right? The more chances you get to bring in input about a person or a situation, the more likely what you're extrapolating out about what's happening is likely to be true, right? But if a guy cuts me off on the freeway, I have one data point about that guy. One. And that one data point about that guy has led me to declare him the biggest jerk in the history of the world. And to the point, if you don't think it's kind of, important or how powerful this is that if it could potentially lead to both of us pulling over and someone really getting hurt, right? Because
road rage.
We're now making a judgment about somebody we don't know anything about, and all we know about is this one interaction we've had with each other.
Yep.
And that's also because there's anger built in, and we're going to talk more about that over time. So there's another layer. You ready? Just when you thought you couldn't get any more layers, this is like those god awful wafer cream things that you'd get at the 99-cent store. What was it? Like they had like waffle and then like
a little wafer
frosting and more waffle and the waffle was pink and orange. I don't know why. Anyway,
it was
so
bad.
There's another podcast episode. Food that shouldn't exist. Although I shouldn't even call it food. So here's another layer. So some research in the 90s talked about how this is really part about the mental efficiency, right? Our brains start by making that snap internal judgment. She's careless, he's rude, automatically. Then, if we have the time and energy, we might correct it and say, okay, to be fair, she's on deadline and understaffed. But that correction is work, and it takes effort, it takes time, and we've already talked about energy. And there's one more layer to consider. And a lot of what we're talking about here isn't some academic mumbo jumbo, right? It is academic mumbo jumbo because it has to be researched. But this is one of those ones that passes the logic test. That if you really pay attention throughout the day, there's stuff that doesn't make sense that we just go along with, and we don't, and we know somewhere back in our mind this doesn't make sense. And here's an example of where this comes into play. Have you ever noticed that a murderer who's been arrested on, the day of a murder, have they ever, in the history of CNN interviews with a murderer's mother, ever had the mom say, "Oh yeah, that little bastard, he's been a nightmare from the beginning. He's such a jerk. I knew he was going to kill somebody." And I don't want to make light of people who go and kill people, but you inevitably will hear what? He's had a really rough childhood. He's a good person at heart. He meant well. And I know I'm using the murderer example, the most extreme example, but when is the last time that somebody who's accused of a crime, for example, their family in general, has ever not come out in support of them, right? And how does that happen? We all know that's weird, right? And we think, well, they must be weird. But what the volume of times that this occurs tells us is that this is likely exactly what would happen if someone in our family was accused of something. And we like to think we're above it, right? Because you've seen the research where they ask somebody, where are you in terms of driving skills? And like 80% of everyone thinks they're better than average, which I'm no mathematician, but we're all prone to this. So, you can't be sitting there, us included, thinking, well, this doesn't really apply to me, because it does. So this idea of, so who do you actually stop and spend time to think about and spend that extra energy trying to figure out someone's behavior, right? Well, if you're not going to do it for your son, who are you going to do it for, right? So we are very selective about that energy that we're going to expend. And family, yes. People we're close with, yes. Random guy on the freeway, no, right? So these are some examples of, you can see in real life, day to day, how this happens, and this explanation being something that is very logical. So when I say it's not mumbo jumbo, there you can actually see it in action.
So Mike, what you're saying, it's almost like there's a first draft, a sloppy copy of you, if you will, of our judgment, and it's always the go-to is it's their personality, and the only way that we change that narrative in our head is to be very intentional about how we reframe it.
Yeah. Or, someone might, and we'll get into how do you mitigate this later, but someone might say, I can't stop and think like this about every single person. No, you're absolutely right. But you can reframe on acting on these snap judgments, right? You can put them away for now. And so just, don't lash out at somebody. Don't go and turn around and say something to someone else horrible about the person who just did this thing to you that you're so upset about, because there may be more going on there. So in lieu of more information, just be careful, right? So, and I know you and I laugh about, when we were doing, pre-show talking about, my gosh, I think we've both made determinations about people's character 10 times. What time is it? At 9 a.m, probably about 10 times this morning, right? But there's this one last twist that I want to throw in there, and that is, there's a culture. There's some interesting things about culture coming out in the research as well. So, as a matter of fact, they've been looking at this as early as the 80s, and so there's been some research around cultures that are more individualistic versus collectivist, right? So cultures that you would think of as being like in America, for example, we have a long, proud history of being individualistic, and we're proud about that, and that we make our own way, and a lot of what we became as a country, you could argue, has a lot to do with that notion of staking out on your own and making things happen. And there's other countries that are less about that, right? We all know that. That's a well-established fact. But what's really interesting is when they study attribution bias, it tends to be more pronounced in countries that have higher levels of that individualistic kind of fabric of their collective psychology. And that only makes sense, right? Because it jives with this idea of that people need to, take it upon themselves to be the best person they can be, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not I'm always going to kind of sound the alarm. For those of you who are not watching, I'm doing an alarm hand signal. Because what's really important to us is this podcast is not designed nor intention to ever alienate anybody on any side of a political aisle or any side of a cultural aisle or any Packers fans. Well, I might, maybe Packer fans, but now there's a lot of you. I better not do that. Maybe who doesn't have many fans? Browns fans? No, they have a lot of fans. They're just
no idea.
Yeah. Browns fans. They're just upset all the time, so they're very sensitive. So we won't pick on anybody around here. So this is not intended to be a dividing. It's just this is what the data is saying, and it's just interesting, right? And so it's this idea of yes, this is who we are, and maybe it's a great thing. That's not a judgment about well, you need to be more like Sweden. No one ever said that. Right? It might be great to be exactly who we are, but just be very mindful that piece might influence this piece, right? And so there's nothing to be extrapolated out in terms of this conversation about what that means. That's a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah. I find it fascinating that we judge each other really in ways that are culturally bound. And growing up in the United States, yes, we were told from the time we were little, you get to choose your destiny. You decide who you're going to be and what you're going to do. And so it is a very obvious outcome that we would assume you did this because of who you are. You made that choice. You could do something different.
It makes a lot of sense. And that's why this idea of calling out these things is not about telling people whether they're good or bad. Right. This isn't about because I named attribution bias and then, and if you're sitting there going, yeah, I think I did. This has nothing to do with a label of good or bad. This is about labeling what is, right? And collecting data, collecting information, and then processing that and then making a thoughtful determination about what to do about it. Right. So let's move on a little bit and talk a little bit about what this actually looks like. Kind of in action, right? Sound like, are you game for this?
I'm game for it. So let's move forward.
I know we've done, yeah. So first of all, we've talked about fundamental attribution bias. And so I do need to just hit the couple of other types of divisions of these, and then we'll get into those. So there's also something called self-serving bias. This is my favorite one because I'm all about serving myself. Self-serving bias is when I explain my own success in ways that make me look good, right? That was my talent, my skill, my work ethic. And I explain my failures in a way that protect my own ego. That wasn't my fault, right? And when I say that, I don't mean that deliberately. No one's sitting there going, how can I make this make me look good? It's the way we navigate the world in general, right? And everything we're talking about today is in general. We're not saying that everybody every single time does every single thing. But when you look at trend data, what you find is this happens over and over and over again with high repeating patterns, right? So when I explain my successes, they typically are ways that make me look good. So let's say I'm a teacher and my students absolutely just crushed a benchmark test, right? I'm going to tell myself that's because, or at least think, I'm not going to say this out loud, right? I might, but it's because I'm great at instructional design. My kids are killing it, right? But then later the scores dip. And now it's going to be, well, that test was poorly written. These kids, they just aren't focused. I can own the win, but I outsource the bias.
So right? let me try one. So I was a middle school basketball coach. So if my team won, that was my motion offense or my rotation strategy or how I was able to motivate them as a coach. But if we lost, it was because the refs were garbage.
Yes.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, as I mentioned before, the refs might have been garbage and the tests might have been poorly written and your kids may not have been motivated, although where I come from, motivating your kids was part of being a great teacher. But that's a whole nother podcast. But these things may be true, but we didn't actually process them to the point to know whether they're true because that's that workload that we have to go through. So there is another one, right? that I'm going to talk about called the actor-observer bias. But what you'll notice is, especially on this last one, some of these things really, because they're so protective, they're designed to protect ourselves. It keeps us from feeling fragile, right? Like if I can explain that the refs were garbage, but and that's great. It's a protection that we put in place for ourselves. But if every bad outcome is not me, right? It blocks my growth. It doesn't help me get better.
Sure.
Right. I'm not going to become a better teacher. I'm not going to become a better basketball coach. Or that ref that was garbage isn't going to get any better if he's not applying these same concepts later. So there's another one called the actor-observer bias. And I have in the show notes, you're going to find lots of resources. So if you want to dive into this more, we've got some, real linchpin studies. We've got some great articles. So there's a lot more here. And this is one that deserves more attention than I'm going to give it. But actor-observer bias, it's kind of like a mashup. It's when I do something, I explain it with context. When you do the exact same thing, I explain it with your personality. We've kind of alluded to this. That's why it sounds familiar. So I show up late and I say, yeah, traffic is horrible. I had to drop my kid off. You show up late and I say, you're irresponsible.
So I'm generous to myself and I'm going to be very judgmental of you.
Exactly. So I'm the actor in my own story. I understand all the context around me. You're just an observer, right? So I don't bother looking for your context. So let me give you another version. I snap at somebody in a meeting. Never happened, but if I did. And I go, listen, I haven't slept. I've got 3 deadlines and I'm worried about my dad's health. I'm under pressure. You snap at someone in a meeting and I'm going to go, wow, she's got anger issues.
Rude.
Right?
Yeah, that
right?
one lands.
Yeah. So the last one we're going to talk about today, and there are more, but this one's interesting because for a lot of reasons, but it's called the hostile attribution bias. And that is where I assign some hostile attributes, just as its name. So it's interesting because it's about threat detection. It's when I interrupt something or interpret something neutral or ambiguous as an attack on me. So I assume there's hostility behind your action, even when there might not be any. So here's the scenario. You're walking through a crowded hallway at work and someone bumps into you from behind. With hostile attribution bias, you immediately think, whoa, rude, that was on purpose. They're disrespecting me. You fill in the intent, and the intent you use to fill in can be entirely negative.
Yeah, sounds like middle school halls during passing period. So you're assuming basically they meant to do that to me. And isn't there something also related to trauma with that people might have experienced?
Yeah, there is. Anybody who has studied trauma, people that have experienced trauma, and when I mean trauma, I mean it can be any number of things. If the more experience you have where there has been hostile intent, real hostile intent, whether through neglect, abuse, you name it, of course, you're going to be more likely. You're essentially have been trained to deploy hostile attribution bias because it's a protection device that has had to potentially serve you to get where you are. And so especially if that trauma occurred during particularly formative years, right? So, and if something keeps happening, it continues to, like, there's a point where you'd be silly not to assume hostile intent, right? So, so again, all of these types doesn't mean that these things, that may not be what's happening. Somebody may have been trying to disrespect you, but it's just what is our tendency to make that assumption right away. And then that can lead to other stuff that's in the show notes about anger. And when you fuse anger in there, and there's almost like an endorphin hit to respond in anger, and this is how you get these cycles of people just basically screaming at each other.
Right. So, Mike, can we shift it a little bit, because I think it might be good for our listeners to get some real life examples that might be a way to kind of frame where attribution bias shows up. And I think it would be helpful for me, but I think it would be helpful for them to kind of recognize themselves in here and maybe cause them to think about things and doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do a few scenarios. So a department lead at work gets a draft from one of their analysts, and there are errors in the data. And the lead, the manager, thinks she's careless. She's not detail oriented. She doesn't take pride in her work, right? That's an internal stable attribution, right? This is who that person is. What the lead doesn't consider is this analyst was given incomplete data, and she got the assignment at 4:45 p.m. from her manager doing the old, I need this in an hour on my desk. And maybe the expectations weren't even clear for this person, right? Mm-hmm. And again, I know some people might say, oh, if you take that kind of attitude with every underperforming person at work, that's welcome to, la la land. Well, of course, if this happens over and over and over again with this same person, right, we're having a different conversation. But this is more about those immediate reactions. However, we'll do an episode on confirmation bias later, and you can see how these things feed off of each other. So even though I might say it's happened 3 or 4 times, right? If I make the determination that this person is incompetent, now it triggers a second type of bias called confirmation bias. That means I'm actually looking for examples of that incompetence. So I'm going to notice the incompetence far more frequently than I would notice the things that happen that are competent, right? And so this is a complicated life we lead, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So go ahead. Yeah.
So instead of seeing, okay, this individual that works for me was really put in a bad spot here, I'm going to go right to, if I'm reading this attribution bias correctly, you're the problem. You did it wrong. You're the issue.
Right. Now that person can be branded as sloppy, and then that sticks. Again, it may prove to be true, but we're not there yet. So here's another one, the rock star presentation. So a sales rep nails a pitch, lands a client. The rep walks out of the room thinking, I am incredible at persuasion. This is why I'm elite, right? And again, maybe not thinking that out loud, but there is a feeling of that. What they're not noticing is maybe the client already had an urgent need. Maybe their competitor had supply chain issues. And maybe the client basically sold themselves because there really wasn't another great option, right? And yours was good enough for them to select. I'm getting all the credit, and it may not be entirely due to me. Now, that doesn't mean I walk around kicking myself all the time. I'm no good at this. I probably only got this because, I'm not going to go full Eeyore, never go full Eeyore, right? But what I mean is when you see these people that are never too high and never too low, part of how they get there is this kind of approach. When you're coming out and you have a chance to have this huge ego boost about how amazing you are, and maybe you will prove to be that you're amazing, right? But you also could be going, okay, I did some good work today. Wonder what else is going on in the landscape. Because what happens is if you start to think it's all me and the way I do everything, then that's how you become the next Blockbuster, right? And when I say Blockbuster, I mean Blockbuster Video. We've got it figured out. We're not going to change anything. We're so awesome. We're a Blockbuster, right? Well, if you're not looking around and saying what external factors might also be influencing our success, next thing you know, you're a Blockbuster. So how about a third scenario?
Love it.
So the investing genius. So someone opens up their financial portfolio. They see their way up and they go, I'm so good at this. I have a gift for picking stocks, right? It's what could have happened is that the entire market sector is running hot, right? Everything in that space went up. And almost anyone holding those companies made a bunch of money.
You may crypto not a while ago.
Right. And crypto again, right? Like this, right? You're not special. Maybe you weren't special. You were in the water when the tide came in. That might be just what happened. Yeah. Would you call me rude?
No. Well, I mean,
it's a rude example, right? But again, this matters because of what happens next. If you believe that you're uniquely brilliant, you might start taking bigger, dumber risks because you've decided the wins are proof of your skill and the role of luck or timing just disappeared from the entire story.
So, right? Mike, let's take a different angle here and zoom out a little bit. Where does this kind of bias really hurt us when we're talking real life scenario?
Oh, how does everywhere sound? And I would say everywhere where there are people, but then also our inner monologue when we're away from other people are affected. So workplace culture, leadership decisions, romantic relationships, and even things like investing. And so in our show notes and some of our documentation we provided along with the episode, there's wonderful articles on how it really can affect relationships, marriages, So it comes into play everywhere. And if you start to really notice this stuff throughout the day, then you'll start to see, oh gosh, this happens everywhere and it's influencing outcomes all around me. So in the workplace, it can poison teams, right? If every success is I did that because I'm awesome, and every failure is because you messed up because you're incompetent, it becomes a blaming culture, right?
Right.
Instead of a problem solving culture, you'll hear things like I carried this project, or if people would just do their jobs, or I can't fix stupid, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure my dad used to say that all the time.
Well, you can't. But the minute that it becomes about somebody's character, the lazy, the weak, the you can't fix stupid, then the conversation stops being what system failed or what can we do differently to support the person that is in the moment having a problem.
Yeah. And and again, I'm going to just do the pause and, what might a skeptic say about what we're saying right now? Right. And this idea of, but there is such a thing as character. There is such a thing of work ethic. And there is such a thing as that. And again, I can't say that enough, that you are absolutely correct in that. But we also need to understand that quite often the judgments are incorrect or at best incomplete. And what we never take into account is you're part of the collective whole, that someone across the street is looking over at you and saying, wow, can't fix incompetent. Can't fix that bad driver. Can't fix lazy, right? Can't fix how mean that person is. Yeah. Right. I had somebody say to me a while back, I remember as part of a leadership conversation, and they were telling me about, they'd gotten frustrated with some people at work, and they went, and she came in and she goes, bad language alert. She goes, oh my God. And I just had to tell, I am such a bitch, but I just snapped at him and I told him blah, 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 blah. I'm such a bitch. And later I came back and coached her on let's take a second, because you can say, I was such a bitch, but then you followed it up with why you were such a bitch. And I'm using your words, right? And I got to have the conversation because she said it. And I said, but notice the other people in the room aren't following up the way you acted and your label of yourself with a bunch of reasons why, right? You just walked out of that room as a supposed leader, acting in a way that was interpreted even by you as being pretty rough, right? But then you're following up with a bunch of rationalization, which actually I agree with a lot of your frustration. However, acting that way was not a solution, right? It didn't lead to a solution, and it just made your job even harder tomorrow, because you got to go work with people that believe that about you, right?
So rescue us, Mike. How do we not do this? Because you've basically just described 90% of human conversations.
Well, I don't think that, it's not something that we're going to fix, because it is hardwired into who we are. I like to think it's something that it's something that we can mitigate, right? These are tendencies. And sometimes, again, they're right. They've evolved in us for a reason. There are times when we need to make snap judgments, right? We can't sit and overanalyze everything, right? But what we can do is be careful about how we react. But let's start with a couple of things that you can strategically do. Number one is building some self-awareness, right? Be honest with yourself about your actual skill level. Look for evidence, right? Look for evidence. The only way to be honest for yourself is to look for external evidence to try to get, where am I on the continuum of where I want to be, right? From outstanding to not good enough. And acknowledge where luck may have saved you, or maybe having a certain person as a teammate really mattered in this instance, right? That's not weak, right? That's how you get to be excellent if you're not, from an external viewpoint, are where you want to be. Like, literally say to yourself, is it possible I got a good outcome here partly because the timing was good, or I had support, or I was surrounded by the right people, or the conditions made it easier for me than for other people? Those are things you could ask yourself.
Yeah, not easy. It's like, rating on your own parade, but probably a good thing to think about.
Yeah. And it keeps you, it helps to, it keeps the arrogance down. It keeps the right. And so another thing is you can consider alternative explanations. This is the one that I find myself having to use a lot. And I find it's one that I can do easily. This is my favorite recommendation. You're probably asking yourself, why didn't you make it number one? And the answer is really, really wise. I I don't know. So it's consider alternative explanations. So before you lock in on she's lazy or he's rude, make yourself generate at least one possible alternative explanation. You don't have to believe it yet. You just have to name it, right? And odds are your plausible explanation is also wrong, right? Because the world is complex and people are operating in complex ecosystems. So the odds that you're going to guess it, including he's a jerk, right, are all unlikely. But you don't have to believe it. You just have to name it. So she missed the deadline because she doesn't care might be, or she was giving conflicting priorities, or she's covering for someone who got called out, or she didn't have the info that she needed.
So basically, don't let the first draft of the storyline be the only draft.
Yeah, the first story is character. The second story is context. Always ask for both, right? Don't just stop with character. So ask for context out loud is another strategy. It's really underrated. Before you assume motive, ask. Say, hey, I noticed you had a lot of gaps in your report. Was that a time crunch or a thing that we missed in the data upstream? And if you do it in a way that's not attacking the person, right? That's how you build a culture of, I'm just investigating the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not, and even if you did butcher it because you had a bad moment, right? This is how, knowing that we're going to call it out and address it. And I'm not going to just make assumptions about the person, and I'm going to ask. So guess what? Ask them what's going on, right? And that may give you some insights.
And it makes you sound less like a jerk.
That's right. And I'm always looking for ways to do that. And then practicing empathy. And I want to be careful with empathy because I know that lately it feels like it's gotten drug into, a bit of a political conversation. And empathy is a real thing that is used in this context. The designer that did the software that you use on your iPhone or your Android was the first thing that designers do in a design process is they go through an empathy stage, right? In design thinking, which is put myself in the user's shoes so I can experience this product as they'll experience. And that's what I mean. So putting yourself in the other person's shoes and saying, what pressures would I feel if I were them in their exact role with their exact bandwidth? Not how you would handle their life. That's completely cheating. You're in their job with your resources and your personality. That's not the same thing, right? As them in their job with their resources and their personality.
Yeah, I love that you said that because fake empathy is, well, if I were them, I would have planned ahead. And that's not empathy. That really is judgment still.
Right. And you're not them, right? So the last one, I got one more, but building a growth mindset. This one's really big. If you believe failure is a permanent statement about who you are, like I'm just bad at this, then you're going to run a self-serving bias more frequently to protect yourself because you have to, or you end up depressed and on a bunch of meds, right? So you're going to say that wasn't my fault. But if you believe that failure is just data, okay, that didn't work. What did I learn? You no longer have to kind of dodge that responsibility. You can say, that didn't work. That was me. Right? Without feeling like you just took a bat to your own identity. Right? So it's that idea of like, and when something bad happens, just think about that as, this is the outcome. And if I look it right in the face, then I can get better for next time.
Yeah.
Right?
So that growth mindset that we love to talk about in education really allows for the ego not to take a hit because you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah. By saying that piece was on me, because, on me doesn't mean forever broken. Right? It just means you're human and you made a mistake. And then last one is really reflect on your own patterns. And I really like this one. Every so often, I think I like them all now that I reflect on all 6 of these. Every so often you look back and ask yourself, where did I take full credit for a win that wasn't 100% me? Where did I assign blame to someone's personality instead of looking at the system? And if you keep seeing other people are the problem or I'm the hero on repeat, then that's a pattern, right? And patterns matter more than one-off moments. So, and sometimes you'll see these people that it's become so pervasive. And most of us, it exists in this space of tolerable, right? To where you don't end up alienated, you don't end up without friends, you don't end up, right, being the person that walks in the room and goes, oh my God, that person's full of themselves. But those people that end up in those spaces have these on overdrive, right? So those people that end up like they have a hard time ever really develop, it's always someone else's fault. So that's kind of a dramatic example of these things at play and how that can get there. But what we'd really like to work towards is, getting to a place where even for the people that are, like this is just part of the daily life, you get through it. but it really hinders who we can become, right? If it's constantly at play.
Yeah, I like that one. Doing your own judgment style audit. I think that's a good one.
Judgment audit. I like that. So let's kind of put this in. So do you think you can put what we've talked about just in plain English? I think I've tried to put it in plain English.
I can try.
How would you, let's let you summarize what you think you've heard today.
So in plain English, so attribution really is the story that we tell about why something happened. And we tend to give ourselves context and grace, but we don't extend that to other people. And if we're not careful, we start to believe that the story that we're telling ourselves is the truth. I'm successful because I'm talented. You failed because you're weak, or you're rude, or you're just incompetent. And we build entire workplace cultures and leadership strategies and even financial decisions, apparently, on top of that story.
Yep. And relationships and political contexts. And if we're always looking at everyone else and seeing the problem lying, the problems and, successes are with me, problem is with everybody else. And also I do extend out my bubble of tolerance and effort for people that are in my circle, right?
Yeah.
My family, I'll give some more energy to that. Well, you don't understand how she grew up, or she's been under this immense pressure, or people that are wearing the same candidate shirt for governor, I'm going to look at completely differently. I'm going to give them a break when I wouldn't give someone wearing the other candidate's t-shirt. And then we wonder how we end up in a country and a world where everyone's looking at everyone else and everyone else thinks everyone else is the a-hole.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we know that really can't be true. Right. If you can take one thing from this episode, it's that your first explanation for someone's behavior is not automatically the correct one. Treat it like a draft and not a verdict.
Yeah. So the unlearning is pause, ask what else could be true, and realize you're not as objective as you think you are.
Yeah. And so the guy that cuts you off in traffic may not actually be Satan, but I can't promise that. So we're going to wrap this episode here soon. And this is such a meaty topic. This is a lot of our episodes are going to be in the 45-minute range. This one, we have a lot of content, and since it's our first one, but we do have a segment we've really been looking forward to. And so if you came here for the learning part of unlearning, this is where the chapter will end, but we're going to have a little bit of fun with a segment that we call stuck in my crawl. That's what happens when your special effects are given to the lowest bidder. But stuck in my crawl. And this is where you want to explain what it is, Melissa, because I know you were super excited.
Sure. I love that you named it that, because we are all gracefully accepting that we are aging into this part of our life where we are allowed to complain with confidence. So
you remember those two old guys on the Muppet Show?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah, I love that. And they just sit up in the balcony and just rip on people and complain about stuff. And also modern day, more Larry David, Seinfeld, right?
Yeah.
And as we get older, you start to get more of the urge, and B, people seem to tolerate it more. So, so we're going to do this segment called Stuck in My Crawl. And, people just, we all have these moments, but we're just going to record. What are some things that really have been bothering us? Like something that just is like really drives us nuts. So what's something that's stuck in your craw, Melissa? Super important, I know.
It's very important. Fork tines, when they don't line up. I cannot eat with a fork if the tine is bent. So I will sit there in a restaurant like a cutlery orthodontist trying to bend it back into alignment, because I just cannot stand putting misaligned metal in my face. So nothing ruins a meal faster for me than having that chaotic silverware issue going on. So I am absolutely that person. If you hand me a janky fork, I'm not judging you as a person. We just learned about that being a bad thing. I'm just going to quietly fix your entire flatware inventory before I can take a bite of my food.
Melissa, I think a couple things. Janky Fork would be a great band name, right?
Ooh.
Thank you, Cleveland. We're Janky Fork. We'll see you next time. That's Cleveland's third reference in this. I don't know what is going on with me. And second, I can't say that I've ever noticed a bent fork tine, and I actually am not even sure I knew that those were called tines. But it also may explain why I end up with random holes in my lower lip and can never explain where they came from. So
What about you?
and I've
What's in
actually,
your craw?
so what I've been, since I knew we were going to do the segment, I've started jotting down things that are stuck in my crawl, and I'm a little concerned with how often I've had to grab my phone to put that down. But I'm going to start with one that's really been on my mind for a long time, and I finally have a platform with which to share it. And I hope this doesn't make any of our listeners at home uncomfortable. But people who spend more time than necessary naked in the gym locker room. Now, I'm not making judgments because, to your point, if I've learned anything, I've learned that I don't want to make a snap judgment about the guy that I'm not even sure he's working out today. I don't think I saw him on the floor, and he didn't appear sweaty, yet he's been in the locker room for 25 minutes with no clothes on, doing all kinds of just random things, including just sitting on the bench that someone else is going to sit on later. But I'm not joking. There are way too many instances, in my opinion, of times where there are just people that are, I get being comfortable, but, have a purpose, have an endpoint here, because to me, it seems awfully open-ended. And I've had some real disturbing moments. I went to one gym years ago that used to have, I probably shouldn't even say this, but I'm going to because it's my crawl and I get to. They had hand dryers, right? And then they also had blow dryers, and which I'm not ashamed to admit that I've used. But then I think the hair dryers were getting stolen, so they installed a hand dryer up higher, which was problematic for two reasons. Number one, I'm too short for how high it was. It didn't really dry my hair. And B, they had these hand dryers at different levels, and one individual in particular was always drying his entire self with these two dryers. And it happened to be, the Venn diagram is guy who dries his entire self with those two dryers at the two levels, and guy who spends way too much time with his clothes off in the gym. And I'm just going to leave it at that. But there's just stuff that shouldn't happen. That to me is absolutely one of them. So, but there are good things out there in the world. We want to stay positive. Like I said, it's Halloween. I'm super excited. And I told you I was going to mention this earlier, but I like to stay in touch with pop culture, but I love doing horror movies in October. I love cinematic horror in particular. Stuff that's like a good movie that happens to be horror. I'm not like a slasher flick kind of person, but, like The Witch is one of my favorites. The Shining. I love stuff like that. But I watched one just this month that's new. It's on HBO Max if you haven't seen it. And it's called Bring Her Back. And it's unbelievable. If you've got an iron like Will and you're not Melissa, I'm not recommending this to Melissa, but if you're somebody who likes a good, creepy, oh my God, what did I just see? I feel like I got to see something I wasn't supposed to, kind of in the vein of Hereditary or one of those movies. And if you're a horror movie fan, you know what I'm talking about. Check out Bring Her Back while it's on HBO. And then also, I haven't had a chance to watch it, but big news in the culture world this week was that the new Stephen King series that follows up on It, the movie and books It, called Welcome to Derry, debuted on HBO as well. Unfortunately, I was a little disappointed to see some of the early reviews on it. It may not have been the hit that but for those of you who have watched it and are disappointed, I do recommend another series based off of Stephen King's books called Castle Rock that I think is probably still on Hulu at this point. And the second season of Castle Rock tells the story of Kathy Bates's character from Misery.
Oh.
Young. Yeah. So what happened to this woman in her early years is covered in season 2 of that show. So really well done. And I actually really liked it. So I know Halloween brings about all kinds of stuff for you though, the October months. Right, Melissa?
Well, two things. Christmas decorations are already out. And, who can, how can you just not get excited about Christmas decorations in October? Right? It's a great.
I'm sensing some cynicism there.
And honestly, pumpkin spice, it needs to go. just
Go where?
it
In my belly?
go away. Pumpkin
No,
spice.
no. This is where we diverge.
I think so.
Yeah, because the only place pumpkin spice needs to go is straight in my belly. I am all in on the pumpkin spice thing. So, all right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. And we're going to be really diving into some really fun questions in our future episodes.
Yeah,
for sure.
Talk a little bit about what those will be, because we do want people to come back, right?
Well, we'll see. They might have already dropped off. But here's some of the questions we're going to be answering. Did ancient aliens ruin America?
Mm.
Will things you learned in movies actually kill you? And who tells the sheep what to argue about? I'm not giving you anything more at this point, but hopefully that's enough of a tease to bring people back. But if this episode, made you at least stop to think differently about yourself or others, or made you chuckle or made you wince, about thinking about the driver, the guy driving by you on the freeway or anything else. If it made you think or ponder, please share, subscribe to the podcast, tell your friends, tell them that they'll get to see new and interesting concert shirts like my Devo shirt every time if they want to watch us. You're going to find us on YouTube, all the normal places where you can find podcasts. And I know you have a thing about reviews on these things too, don't
please
you?
make sure that you're leaving us a review. And if your review is not 5 stars, Mike is going to immediately say, wow, they must have been going through something very hard today, and he'll extend you infinite grace. I, on the other hand, will screenshot it. I will color code it. I will bring it back up in a future episode with charts. So either way, you'll get our full attention. But do subscribe, and make sure that you leave us a comment, because we will read them.
Yes, we will. And we'll be looking for audience engagement on some questions in the future to get your input. And I promise not to make any value judgments about anybody who thinks our podcast could be better. But, feel free to always message us as well. And so, if you have ideas or suggestions to help with this podcast, we would love to hear it. And what would keep you coming back? So Facebook, YouTube, all the normal places, the drill. Again, check out our show notes. We were super excited to have you stay with us on this extended version. We'll call this the Francis Ford Coppola edition, or Martin Scorsese edition of Unlearning Out Loud with Mike and Melissa. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Have a good one. We'll see you next time.